Next up, we have Elizabeth Seiver from PLOS Medicine. PLOS, excuse me.
PLOS, thank you.
PLOS.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Seiver. I'm a researcher at the nonprofit open access publisher Public Library of Science, or PLOS, or PLOS, or we call it PLOS. My co-author, Helen Atkins, and I are both employees of PLOS. The study I'll be presenting includes data that we collected at PLOS, so consider that our conflict of interest. So first, to set up the topic of signed peer review, we should define it. So we've talked about how there are lots of different definitions of open peer review. For signed peer review specifically, we're talking about reviews where the reviewer reveals their name to the author in a typical closed peer review session. And as other speakers have alluded to, the practices around this vary widely by field. I'm from the social sciences, where double-blind peer review is the most common. In the life sciences, single-blind review is very common. And a lot of the pioneering work in signed reviews comes from some of the medical journals, like the BMJ. So there are a number of journal editors who express some hesitation about moving towards a signed peer review model. One of those kinds of concerns can be that signed reviews might be lower quality because people feel they can be less honest. But there have been many studies that support the value of signed reviews, where they found that they are more constructive as rated by authors and editors, that they maybe will take a little bit longer to receive, or there might be a little bit of a lower review acceptance rate, but that overall they can improve the experience. So for PLOS journals specifically, PLOS has a suite of 7 journals, and for all of the journals, PLOS encourages reviewers to reveal their name to the author, but it is not required. And the prompt is very similar on all the journals, where it says if you wish to reveal your name to the author, put it in this box. One of our journals, PLOS Medicine, also includes a yes/no checkbox for whether you'd like to sign your review. So in the data I'm going to be presenting, I'm going to be focusing on 3 PLOS journals specifically. So PLOS 1 is our large, quote-unquote, mega journal, multidisciplinary, very, very diverse research community. For PLOS Medicine, that's one of our flagship journals. Most of the editorial staff is in-house. And then PLOS Computational Biology, which is one of our community journals, is the computational biology community, which also includes bioinformatics. And so something that might be helpful to also know about this particular research group is that they tend to be at the forefront of a lot of open science endeavors. They're some of the early adopters of the archive, largely because there's a big overlap with computer science. So they were posting preprints, earlier than other areas of biology. And also they contribute a lot to the open source movement and use a lot of open source tools. And of course, PLOS journals are open access, so there's a lot of openness going on here. So with this data, we considered 2 types of measures. So one is a behavioral measure, which is just how often are reviewers at these PLOS journals signing their reviews, and also what are their attitudes about signing, what do reviewers and authors think or prefer about signing reviews. So first, let's look at some of the signing data. So this is the percentage of reviews signed by year from 2013 to 2016 at these 3 journals. And you'll notice that for both PLOS Computational Biology and PLOS 1, the rate is pretty consistently low, between about 5 and 10%. And that holds true across the years. And PLOS Medicine, on the other hand, has a much higher signing rate, varying between about 30 and 40%, with a slight dip in the most recent year. But you'll notice that there is a very large difference, and that PLOS Medicine seems to have a lot more reviews signed. So then we wanted to dig in a little bit and see, is there a difference in the kinds of articles that are getting signed reviews or not? And so what we did is, for a subset of the articles from 2015 and 2016, we looked at the final editorial outcome for this set of reviews. That is, whether the reviews were published or rejected. It appears that the rejected key has disappeared off the screen, but you might be able to guess that the brown bars in this case mean reviews for articles that were eventually rejected. And so you'll notice that the pattern between the three journals is consistent again. The signing rate for PLOS Medicine is higher, but also across all three journals, there's a consistent difference between reviews for articles that were eventually published or rejected, in that for published articles, there's a slightly higher percentage of reviews that are signed. This might offer some credence to one theory about why reviewers might be hesitant to sign if they're worried about retribution. But it's hard to know exactly what the cause is. So that's the behavioral data that we have. Now let's move on to the survey data, where we asked both reviewers and authors about their views on signed review. And starting with reviewers, so this data is not linked one-to-one with the previous data. This is a separate, fully anonymized data set. We asked reviewers in 2015 to 2016, how often do they sign reviews? And we excluded first-time reviewers from this because they haven't been reviewing enough to have a trend in one direction or another. And so we asked if they signed usually, sometimes, or never is the gray bar. And so you'll notice that for PLOS Medicine, again, the rate of reviewers who usually or sometimes sign is higher than for the other journals. But for PLOS Computational Biology, the self-report of how often they sign seems to be also a lot higher and for PLOS One, it seems to be a lot higher than the actual number of reviews that are signed, showing a sort of mismatch potentially for those two journals in self-reported rate of review signing and actual review signing. Then we also wanted to get a sense of what authors actually prefer. Do they like signed reviews or not? So in this slide here, teal means that they usually sign, and watch what happens to the teal in the next one. So this is the proportion of authors who say that they prefer to receive either a signed review in teal, an unsigned review in gray, or neither in purple. And so apologies for the small sample sizes for the last two journals in this case, but all of this supports previous research in that authors tend to be in favor of signed review, at the very least open to the idea. You'll notice that those who declare an explicit preference for unsigned review are a pretty small group. And I mean, it makes sense. Like, what do authors get from signed review? They get more information about who's evaluating their work. There's not really much of a direct downside to authors for that. And then we also wondered, how much of this preference might be due to experience with signed review, and the proportion. Whoa. Okay, let me go back. So the proportion of authors who actually report that they have received signed reviews before is lower than those who say that they would potentially prefer that for all the journals. And for PLOS Medicine, it's at 50%. So even though authors might not have a huge amount of experience with this is still something that they are very open to. And again, we excluded first-time authors because they wouldn't have a lot of experience with whether they have or haven't received signed reviews. So, in addition to asking these multiple choice questions about their experiences, we also asked follow-up questions in more depth, and there were several themes that emerged from their comments. So for reviewers who prefer to sign reviews, they listed some of those benefits as that they felt that it improved accountability and the constructiveness of their reviews. For those who prefer not signing, they mirror some of the concerns I mentioned that editors can have, where they felt they could be more honest and were safe from retribution. But there was also a good number of reviewers who, while they said they haven't signed reviews, it wasn't that they didn't have a preference. They said, well, I've never been asked before, and I'm not really sure of the benefits. Why would I sign? So it just that incentive structure was maybe not laid out clearly. And then for authors, when we asked why they preferred signed reviews, they mentioned being able to learn the reviewer's area of expertise and a potential for more open communication as being especially desirable. So, if you're a journal and you want to encourage more review signing, what might you be able to do about that? One thing you can do is directly request a signature. That's a good start. And since reviewers mentioned potentially not being aware of incentives, provide incentives directly, or at the very least describe what some of those benefits of signing might be. And again, if you remember the discrepancy between reviewers and authors in their preference for signed reviews, reviewers are also authors. So it might be helpful to encourage them to take the author's perspective of how they as authors might benefit from receiving a signed review as opposed to unsigned. So there's a lot of room here for exciting future studies. So some things that we'd like to look at would be identifying more factors that would be affecting review signing, identifying other kinds of differences between signed and unsigned reviews, experimenting potentially with different signing prompts. Because the user experience of actually going through the review, I mentioned that we have a text box where they put their name, but there's a lot of ways that you can manipulate that, and there's a very cool differences between journals and how they actually, the actual experience for signing reviews that could potentially be driving behavior and communicating, implicit norms about signing in that particular community and with that journal. And it would also be great to be able to compare the attitudes and practices directly, where we could do a one-to-one mapping, knowing which reviewers signed or not, and whether they generally sign or not sign in their self-report. So I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Scott Lemire from Baylor College of Medicine and Journal of Surgical Research. Thank you for that terrific presentation. How many individuals that answered the survey as authors also answered the survey as reviewers, assuming that there must be some overlap between those two groups? And if you were able to look at that, to what degree was there concordance or discordance between the attitudes? In other words, were there people who said, from an author perspective, yes, I'd like to have signed reviews, but yet when they answered as a reviewer, never signed reviews?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, because the data was fully anonymized with the way we ran the survey, we weren't able to cross-tabulate that. However, in their follow-up comments, both authors and reviewers pointed to the perspective of the other role. Like, for example, some authors who said they didn't want to receive a signed review might say, well, if I were the reviewer, I wouldn't want to sign my name. And some reviewers, identifying sort of potentially more benevolent aspects of signing reviews, were saying, it can help out the author. So there was, because most authors and reviewers are both, right? And so there was acknowledgement of those different roles, but we don't, unfortunately, know the overlap for our data. Thanks.
You showed the relationship between whether somebody signed a review or didn't sign the review with whether the manuscript was accepted or not accepted.
Yes.
But that's at the manuscript level. Did you actually look at the individual review level, whether it was a recommendation to accept or not accept, or just a negative review or a positive review in general?
Right, so let me see. Oh, I passed it. There we go. Right, so you're talking about whether it's, right. So in this case, the bars represent the reviews themselves, and so they're compared for the eventual editorial outcome. So they didn't know at the time. There's a difference between the journals whether the reviewers actually make a recommendation to publish or not publish. So I believe for PLOS Medicine, or PLOS One, they do actually make a recommendation. And I'm not sure that that's the case for PLOS Medicine or PLOS Computational Biology. In any case, we didn't actually look at the content of the reviews themselves to see if they were positive or negative, because it is possible for some of the ones that were rejected, the reviews where they were assigned could be positive or negative. So we didn't actually do that kind of analysis. Thanks.
Hi, Valda Vincent in Science. This wouldn't be directly addressed in your survey, but I just wondered if you had any sense, because you will be landing up in situations where you have some reviewers who are signing and some who are not. Mm-hmm. Is that leading to any complications in the process?
Because some reviewers are signing or not signing?
Yeah, some reviewers are signing and some are not, so the authors know the identity of some, they don't know. Is that affecting how they're addressing the reviews? Is that affecting how the editors are considering? I'm just wondering if that affects the decision in any way.
That's a great question. Not that I'm aware of, although I'm not one of the people on the front lines of the moderating that sort of process. I do have some theories about that. One future study I would like to do would be looking at the signing rate of the first review versus subsequent rounds of revision. So one thing that I do hypothesize is that if reviewers see that somebody else has signed, they might be more likely to sign a later one. But future studies will have to look at that.
Thea Bloom, BMJ, but I used to be the editor-in-chief of PLOS Biology, so we operated this. Some people sign, some people don't. And actually what I think is really interesting is the authors ignored the fact that they knew who someone was, and they always reply, reviewer 1 said this, and reviewer 2 said that, and reviewer 3 said, and it's like, you do know who reviewer 3 is, right, because they've given you their name. So I think there's a sort of sense that they're all equal, and some of them just happen to have included their name. That's anecdote, not data.
Just wondered, your sample size, your response rates vary from 3 to 25%, and there would be a concern that there's response bias here. And I wonder whether you could anticipate what, if people who are more interested chose to respond, do you think they would be more pro-signing or more anti-signing, or how might your results be biased?
Yes, so response bias is going to be a problem with any survey. Based on the length and passion level of the comments, I would say that there wasn't a clear bias in the responses for signing or not signing. The people had very strong views in both directions. So my guess would be that just the level of personal belief or investment in how important signing reviews was or how important anonymity was would be driving responses as opposed to a particular view in one direction or another. People get very passionate about this.
Anne Gregory, Heart, Lung and Circulation, and previously Medical Journal of Australia. Asking on behalf of early career researchers who may be invited to review due to the dearth of reviewers available or wanting to spend time, would you allow co-signing where a junior researcher can be supported by a senior who maybe has checked their review prior to posting?
So I think co-signing is a very interesting and complicated topic because one of the things that happens in practice is that sometimes graduate students or postdocs will essentially ghostwrite reviews for their PI. So then if you want to, we don't need to get into the issue of getting credit for peer reviews as actual valid scholarly documents, but I think that in general, if people are going to be signing reviews, you'd want the actual authors to be signing. If the PI is participating in that way, like having their name on there makes sense in that they're an author of the review.
No further questions? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.